Hello and welcome back to Finding King Richard III. I'm Linda Selman, and with me today I have the great English poet, playwright and actor William Shakespeare, accompanied by Al Pacino, famous American actor and film director. They are here to discuss how Pacino's Looking for Richard connects the modern audience with Shakespeare's King Richard III by showing the relevance in his works to the modern society, and how Looking for Richard enhances the literary appreciation for Shakespeare's creating a world where we can see his works all around us. We will comment on topics such as context and values, relationships between texts, and different ways the audience responds to text through form and style. The two texts created by these great men both feature various contexts, values, and perspectives. Shakespeare, are you able to explain to the audience what was the context of your time, and how did that shape the values and perspectives that influenced your play King Richard III?
I created my historical play in the early 1590s. It was the Elizabethan time period, which influenced me to adjust my production in order to showcase the monarchy as the rightful rulers, despite what may have actually happened. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by the son of York. These opening lines of Richard's soliloquy is stating that their unhappiness has come to an end now that his family is in power and his brother wears the crown. He implies this using the winter and summer seasons as a metaphor for their happiness. This opening scene gives context to the audience about the monarchy as they present moment and an insight into Richard's thoughts. It was a time that valued religion, art and power above all, which I expressed within my plays. Religion was a very strong value in my time, which showed greatly in the play, with cursing threats of hell to wishing people peace with God. The allusion in the play is extremely strong, with the clear reference in the historical time period and religious values. These key aspects of what shaped my perspective in what I thought would be successful entertainment for my viewing audience, hence the creation of King Richard III.
So Pacino, how would you compare your context and values of Looking for Richard to Shakespeare's, and did that have any influence on perspectives within your docudrama?
I created Looking for Richard over 4 years in the 1900s. I think that our contexts differ significantly with the rise of technology in the 1900s, which shifted the way society lived day to day. The differences in society is what creates the context of each text and forms a composer's perspective. I do believe, however, that our values are remarkably similar, despite the dramatic difference in context. Our governments still pride themselves on power, people are obsessed with celebrities from their favourite movies, and religion is still so strong and present in every community. The modern society have no empathy towards anyone, and my purpose was to take the value of empathy and try and teach it to the youth of the 90s through Shakespeare's King Richard III. We interviewed a man while conducting our Vox Pops about his thoughts on Shakespeare. His response was, "We should introduce Shakespeare into the academic, because then the kids would have feelings." So I asked him if Shakespeare helped with that. He replied with, "He did more than help, he instructed us." The interview showed us that there are still members of the modern society that appreciate Shakespeare and agree that he still has relevance in modern society. My docudrama was no doubt influenced by the context it was created in, because my main purpose was to connect the modern audience to Shakespeare. I did this through a recreation of King Richard III, and in doing so I reached an audience that would not normally participate in that type of language and world, in hopes of establishing the appreciation of Shakespeare that the modern audience lacks.
Providentialism versus free will, and the universal themes of war and power can be seen throughout both of the texts. The character of King Richard III is displayed as a Machiavellian character, as well as the text's vice figure. Shakespeare, can you tell us how you display these themes in your play King Richard III, and describe how you created King Richard III to be this type of character?
To be truthfully honest, the universal theme of war and power just came from the context of the time. The aftermath of the War of the Roses created the foundation of our society. Every murder, action, and manipulative conversations Richard had was based on these themes of war and power. For example, when he kills off his family so he has the crown by default, or when he ends up in war with Richmond, proving his quote, "Have no delight to pass away the time, unless to see my shadow in the sun, and a scent on mine own deformity, which means he isn't cut out for peace because he is unable to seduce women due to his deformity. Therefore, he thinks he is better suited to conflict or times of war. Prudentialism was a huge aspect of our play, shown through Richard's determination to prove a villain, as he quotes in the play. Every step he takes adds in his steel for the crown. All the plotting, bloodshed, manipulation, all his hard work for nothing, to end in the irony of wanting to trade it all for a horse. To avoid it, the well-deserved death God had fated for him. King Richard's character was manipulative, sadistic, and the only empathy he had was for himself. He became the Machiavellian base of all these characters and actions. Through the play, various characters alluded the access King Richard to be the work of the devil because of his deformities and his genuine nature, and he indeed provided with all the miraculous murders he orchestrated, turning him into the play-verse figure.
Pacino, what did you think of Shakespeare portraying Richard's actions as providentialism, and do you agree that Richard is a Machiavellian character as well as a place-vice figure? And how did you use the universal themes of war, power and empathy to connect to the modern audience?
I personally don't think he acted as providentialism. I think it was out of free will because I believe the quote, "I am determined to prove a villain," by King Richard is the character purposely going out of his way to make himself the villain, and all his actions he decided himself out of free will. I do agree that he is a Machiavellian character with his manipulative and unscrupulous nature. Looking at it from Shakespeare's and a religious context, I do believe he is the vice figure just from the way Shakespeare had set up the play with other characters commenting on his evilness and his devilish representations, such as Margaret's quote, "Richard yet lives, hell's black intelligencer, only reserved their factor to buy souls and send them thither." By linking the universal themes to Shakespeare's King Richard III, I was able to tell the story a way a modern audience can relate. In doing this, I hopefully succeeded with my purpose of wanting the modern audience to have a greater appreciation of Shakespeare and his work, because I feel the modern society lack the empathy to do so.
There are many ways audiences respond to their text. Both of you achieved to do this through the use of form. Shakespeare, how would you describe the way you composed your play and what was it in response to?
The way I composed King Richard III had a very different form to how I would normally structure my plays. In the play, I emphasised Richard's flaws to the point where he could acknowledge that there were and accepted them, rather than other plays where the characters struggle with their flaws. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks and discount on my own deformity. Richard's flaws fueled his motivation to become king, but still led to his ultimate demise. This was sticking to my original form, where my characters end stem from their flaws. With majority of the plays from being changed, I was able to foreshadow Richard's downfall in a way I have never explored before. My play King Richard III was a response in the values of the time and the strong monarchical wars that were so influential in that society. The values shaped the dramatic structure and form of the play, with how characters were perceived and how the events of the play would fold out. Without the monarchical values, the play wouldn't exist. The entirety of the play is formed around who's on the throne and strive for power.
Pacino, as we know, your docudrama Looking for Richard was a response to Shakespeare's King Richard III. Could you tell us why you wanted to respond to this text, and how was your composing form different to an original film?
I responded to this text because I wanted to show a modern audience the relevance Shakespeare still has in our current society that I feel needs to be appreciated. When composing Looking for Richard, I found difficulty in trying to display my message in a way it would really connect to the audience I was trying to reach. In the film, I quoted the phrase, "A person has an opinion. It's only an opinion. It's never a question of right or wrong." This really influenced me in creating a docudrama that featured various aspects of the filmmaking process. I used intertextuality to show that relationship between my interpretation of King Richard III to Shakespeare's version based on our different perspectives. My end result was the docudrama that is looking for Richard, featuring many vox pops, academic interviews, behind-the-scenes directing, and cast discussions of how we perceive the characters from King Richard III and how they should be presented. I feel that this form of film making and behind-the-scenes opinions and perspectives really helped my co-director and I to compose something different from the modern audience.
That's all we have for this podcast. I'd like to thank our guests, William Shakespeare and Al Pacino, for discussing their perspectives of context and values, relationships and themes between the text, and different ways the audience respond to text through form and style. I think we can all agree that Pacino's Looking for Richard connected the modern audience with Shakespeare's King Richard III by showing the relevance in his work to modern society, and that Looking for Richard enhanced the literary appreciation for Shakespeare, creating a world where we can see his works all around us. I'm Linda Selman, and thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another segment of Finding King Richard III.